This week on Quadriga, Greece under austerity, reform or rebellion. Violence yet again on the streets of Athens, as Greece's politicians struggle to comply with the demands of international lenders. Brussels is insisting that Greece implement reforms. Only then will 130 billion euros of support money be released. Otherwise, the country may default and be forced out of the Eurozone. But doubts persist that Greece really can impose austerity. On the streets, striking unions and enraged pensioners are saying enough is enough. Your host today, Melinda Cray.
Enough is enough has become a veritable Greek chorus, both in Athens and abroad. How committed are the Greek politicians and the Greek people to true reform? And if this bailout deal falls through, what's next? That's what we want to talk about today with Ulrike Herrmann. She's opinion page editor at the German newspaper The Taz. She worked in banking before taking up journalism, and she's reported on both politics and business. And Moritz Döbler, he's in charge of the business desk at the Berlin daily The Tagesspiegel. His career has included foreign assignments in Rwanda and Bosnia, and he has been a reporter for the news agency DPA. And Theodoros Kouvakis is Berlin correspondent for Greece's Real Media. His areas of expertise include European financial markets and foreign policy. Theodoros Kouvakis, let's start out by taking a look at Greece's commitment to this latest bailout deal, starting with the government. Leaders from the main parties have now given pledges that they are committed to the program that's being set out. Can we take them at their word?
Yes, but we don't know if they will be in charge of the parties after the elections. Most probably the political scene in Greece is going to be changing fast after the first elections and then the second ones, because you're sure you can't have a stable government so fast. And that would be quite a problem for both Greece and the European Union.
Elections, of course, are set to be held in April. It's thought that the opposition leader, Antonio Samaras,
yes,
will most likely have a large majority, perhaps not a commanding one. He has given his pledge of commitment to this reform program, but with a hedge.
Yes, in general. He says, yes, I commit to the broad scope of this program, and he definitely wants to renegotiate lots of details. That's how it is, and he's definitely not going to be able to form his own government, not a strong-handed government anyways.
Ulrike Herrmann, 5 ministers resigned in this latest wrangling. Do you think that the crisis is at least promoting some kind of cohesiveness now and clearing minds in Athens?
Well, no. My impression is that all these politicians are waiting for the next election and that they want to position them as well as possible to win. So I think that if you want to have a deal with Athens, it would be good if you had these elections as quickly as possible. But I agree that even after the election, you won't have a stable government. And that's very, very unfortunate for Greece because, you know, Portugal is the other example in the European Union with a heavily indebted country that will not be able to pay back its debts. But because the Portuguese all work together and comply with those demands from Brussels, they will get a haircut and another bailout, and there will be no problem. Mm-hmm. But with Greece, you know, all this resistance from Greece against the conditions nailed down, it's really very difficult. I think that in the long run, Greece will, that's a very pessimistic view, but and nothing I would wish for, but I think in the long run, Greece will leave the euro if this continues that way.
Moritz Döbler, in Italy, Ulrike Herrmann mentioned the Portuguese example. We also, of course, have the example of Italy, where a change at the top has restored confidence, at least to some degree. Why hasn't that been the case in Greece? We have already seen shifts in the composition of the government. Why hasn't it worked to renew the country's leadership in the way that, for instance, Mario Monti has in Italy?
Well, I'm not an expert on Greece, but I think the difference is that the crisis in Greece is much bigger than it is in Italy. So the problem is much bigger, A. And B, that we've been talking about the crisis in Greece for a much longer time. We've been talking about Greece for 2, maybe 2.5 years. And Italy was in the focus for the past 6, 7, 8 months, not so much earlier. So I think the magnitude of the problem and the duration of the debate really fuels problems in Greece itself.
Theodoros Kouvakis, I'd like to come back to the remarks that were made by Mr. Samaras, the opposition leader. He said that he would more or less stick to the deal that's being put out before him, but he says that the shrinking economy needs to be kick-started and that the program might have to be adapted in accordance with that. That's actually not so far off, is it?
Well, I think we should put our facts together, first of all, and see that Greece had a public debt ratio of 105% back in 2007. Now it has something like 165%, whilst budget deficits have not been that big. So you see that the shrinking economy is magnifying the problem. So what Mr. Samaras has already said, and what lots of politicians in Germany and other European countries have said, is that the most important thing would be to help growth in Greece in order to maximize public revenues and be able to pay back and make a bigger primary surplus, because Greece already has a primary surplus if you take out the interest payments. I think that's what Mrs. Samaras is talking about. I think it is mostly wishful thinking, because Greece has very poor infrastructure, it has a very poor business climate, and mainly it doesn't have the Greek people behind any attempt to resolve the problem, because the Greek public is aware of corruption, which was the rule for the past decades. We had either incompetent or corrupt governments, or both. And the public has never seen any politician, out of which, from the ones who we know that have taken bribes, being in jail. So they say, we pay for it, we have our pensions cut, we have our salaries cut, we have 25% nominal unemployment, but really it's something like unemployment and underemployment being at around 50%. We have something like 37,000 homeless people in Athens, whilst 2 years ago it was a maximum 2,000. So, and since they don't see a catharsis in this political climate, they are not willing to support anybody in any way.
You meant the problem, though, is I can see how desperate people are in Greece, and I can see why, and I have compassion for those people, of course. But what is the alternative? The alternative is leaving the euro? Well, that's going back to medieval times, basically. That's going to kill the Greek economy, and it's going to cost just as much for the European partners. So I don't think that's the way to go. And I don't understand why there's no Greek politician that is able to convince the public that this is the way to go. I mean, you voluntarily joined the euro. It was not something that came from outer space.
Definitely.
You know?
It was a mistake. Definitely.
I'd like to come back in just a moment to the question of departure from the euro and whether that is a real option. But let's stay briefly with this point about mistrust. Newspapers here in Germany are reporting this morning that 98% of the Greek people say corruption is a major problem in their country, and a majority of Greeks say they themselves deal with corruption on a daily basis. That mistrust, that is palpable not only within Greece, but abroad as well. Let's listen to what some of the leaders in the Eurogroup have been saying.
Politicians in the richer Eurozone countries are losing patience with Greece. The German Chancellor insists there's no alternative to spending cuts and economic reforms.
Eine there can and will not be a change in the austerity programme.
The chairman of the Eurogroup takes a similarly hard line.
No disbursement before implementation, because we cannot live with a system where promises are made and repeated and repeated.
The aim is to keep Greece inside the euro, if possible. But everyone is aware that the Greek people cannot take much more pain. The measures agreed between the Greek government and the Troika are not intended to torment anyone. Rather, the intention is to help Greece get on a path towards a competitive, growing economy.
Ulrike Herrmann, that's really the crux of what's become a very, very bitter debate here. Is austerity the path to growth or not? We just heard your German finance minister saying it's the only way to get Greece growing again, but an awful lot of people disagree.
Well, of course, austerity alone will never, ever produce any growth. That's obvious. And, of course, Greece needs a Marshall Plan. But the problem is, Greece really got a lot of money from the European Union. It was about 100 billion euro that they got over the time without the credit, without the loans, and the bonds that were bought. Just the help from the European Union amounted to 100 billion. And now this money is somehow gone. And the corruption is a problem. And so many European politicians have this feeling that if they put more money into Greece, it would just be embezzled. And I think that is something, of course, that's really a big problem. As long as there is corruption in Greece, on the scale there is, it is really very difficult to help Greece, because you can never ever be sure that the money ends up where you need it, instead of some pockets of politicians.
I agree that corruption is a big problem, that the taxing authorities are malfunctional.
Yeah, the justice system is malfunctional.
But I see...
Apparently, of the tax money that was supposed to have been collected since the last reform or the last austerity program was put into place, 1%? 1% has been collected of the tax revenues that were overdue?
I mean, there's all these signals, but there's also encouraging signals. Public spending has gone down in Greece in the past 3 years by 17%. So there is austerity, there is reform. It's moving slowly, but it is moving. And I think if you had that kind of program in Germany or France or Italy, people would be on the streets. People would be... It would look just the same. So yes, it is very hard to do, but I think Greece is indeed moving a bit.
How long, Theodoros Kouvakis, can this deal be delayed without pushing Greece into a disorderly default or even departure from the euro? The bailout deal is now looking somewhat shaky. There's talk of postponing some parts of it and putting others into place. What do you think? How long can Greece hold out?
1 month. We have to pay back something like 15 billion euros of public debt, which is maturing at the middle of March. And if this deal doesn't go through, then Greece might be able to pay, I think, something like 70% of these 15 billion, but not all the sum. So the problem is imminent, right in front of us.
Ulrike Herrmann, the rescue deal was looking very wobbly almost as soon as it was agreed to, both by the Eurogroup initially and also by the Greek Parliament. What do you think? Can the bailout be saved?
Well, I think, it will be split up. I think, what the European governments will try to do is to have this haircut with the private creditors.
Debt write-down.
So with the banks and the insurance companies, because that would bring 100 billion euro for Greece. And in order to do that, they would free 30 billions, because those 30 billions are needed because lots of these government bonds of Greece are held by Greek banks who would be bankrupt immediately after this haircut. So they would have to be rescued with these 30 billion. So those 30 billions will go through, but everything else will be postponed, I think, till the elections in Athens are through. Because, exactly as Mr. Kouvaras said, many European governments have this feeling that once Mr. Samaras is ruling, he will try to renegotiate everything, so they don't want to spend all their money, but have some pressure to put on
well, maybe
Mr.
not
Samaras.
renegotiating everything, but some substantial parts
Yeah,
of the
and of
deal.
course the European governments don't feel like renegotiating any of that. So.
But it makes sense, though. I mean, if there's a point in elections, then the point is the people decide. So you can't really expect all Greek parties to give promises about something that's going to happen after elections. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, but then you can't expect the Europeans to give the money. So what will happen, in fact, is that they will postpone the bailout.
Yeah, that's what
But
I
of
think
course,
too.
democracy has been one of the victims of this euro crisis, hasn't it? We've seen caretaker, technocratic governments emerging in a number of countries.
Yeah, but I think maybe it's a wise idea to split the package up. I mean, why do we have to mobilize 130 billion euros now? Why can't we just mobilize what's needed, to rescue Greece over the next month?
Then let's talk briefly about that debt write-down, the haircut, as Ulrike Hammond's been referring to it. As I understand it, it would be one of the biggest debt write-downs in history. The question is, nonetheless, Morris Dubler, first of all, will the creditors go along? Will enough creditors go along? And is even this huge write-down going to be enough?
Frankly, I don't know. Waits to be seen. We talked about 50% before. Now we're talking about 70%. I think if you asked me whether I'd like to spend on Greek government bonds, my money on Greek government bonds, I would say no. So yeah, maybe in the end it's going to be 100% haircut. But the thing that they're working on, and I can see the point, is that there is not supposed to be a default of Greece. Because then credit default swaps are going to be applicable and the whole thing is going to explode, basically. So maybe we're going to see 50%, 70%, in the end, maybe 100% haircut. Who knows?
Theodoros Kouvakis.
It's absolutely correct, and it magnifies a problem that we are all trying to hide under the carpet since 4 or 5 years now. Which is the funny money circulating in markets. I mean, leverage, which produces so-called money, which is not money, it's, typed money. And we build our future on this kind of money, and we don't build it on infrastructure, on liberalizing services and real economy.
Who is we when you say we?
The global financial situation is like this. That's what I mean. I mean, why was Lehman Brothers collapse so important for everybody? Because it was so much leverage that...
Yeah, but I don't think you can explain the Greece crisis by Lehman Brothers. I'm sorry.
Exactly.
You can explain the easy money that flew into Greece this way.
And also, of course, flew out of Greece. We hear from, again and again from Greece, that many of the wealthy have long since taken their money out of the country, put it somewhere in safety, keeping it in euros, of course, in case Greece leaves the eurozone. And meanwhile, it's the common people who bear the pain.
Right. Listen, you have to remember that, if you knew that 15 years ago, Greeks were a people of saving people. The Greeks were saving money. They're putting money aside, in a bank account or under the mattress. They were trying to prepare for harder times. From the moment that our interest rates, the moment Greece joined the euro, interest rates went down from 12-13% to 3-4%. Okay, that was so much easy money, and the whole situation was, okay, now we are rich, we have money, you can spend, buy cars, buy this, buy that, buy houses, build, okay? Greeks were not a nation of lazy and luxuriously living people. Greece was poor, as it still is. It just had an injection of easy money, and that's where the financial markets are involved also. And now the time has come to pay. And, for example, maturity of next month is connected to the Olympic Games, which was an extravagance which Mr. Monti is avoiding now for Rome. Fortunately. Okay? We didn't do that. We spent lots of money. We means our government and the people who followed the general atmosphere of bien-être in the Eurozone. Okay? Greece was not ready to join the Eurozone because it had not put its house in order. And that shows now.
My point just is, I can see the pain the Greek have, but I don't think it's fair to put the blame somewhere else. I think the blame is within Greece.
Definitely, that's what I said from the beginning. Yeah. Definitely. I mean, we had corrupt governments or incompetent. We have mechanisms, public mechanisms, which were corrupt. People had to pay in order to be operated by a surgeon in a public hospital. Okay? Let me introduce another point. The German government has negotiated fines from companies who were bribing Greek politicians in order to buy security systems, submarines, or whatever. Okay? The American government has imposed fines, and companies have paid for corrupting Greeks and Portuguese and I think Hungarian doctors into buying prosthetics for orthopedics, hundreds of millions of euros or dollars. Okay?
But the German managers are now in jail, whereas those in Greek who were, on the other hand, on the receiving end of the corruption, are still free men. And that just shows the difference. I have an
explanation for why Greece has not put in jail politicians, corrupt politicians or public servants, but I don't have an explanation why the German judicial system did not assist the Greek one or force the Greek, or just say, these people are in prison because they bribed these people. Okay? And I go back to what I said in the beginning.
That's quite obvious who was bribed in Greece, but it's not possible for the Greek just to...
Then the Greek system is not obliged to take Mr. Tot and Tot and put it...
We can't change that.
No, you can't.
The kind of anger that you're talking about, whether directed at Greece's own politicians or abroad, was certainly making itself felt on the streets of Athens this week. Let's take a look.
Burning buildings and running battles between protesters and police. So far, these are among the most visible signs of the financial pressure on the Greeks. The worst violence may be the work of a small minority of militants, but ordinary people are angry too.
Europe is asking too much at the moment. The Greeks are trying to do the best they can as we speak.
As austerity descends on the country, pensioners are being squeezed. People face cuts in pay and higher taxes. The trade unions are marching in the streets. The social fabric is crumbling, and many Greeks feel the politicians have left them to pick up the pieces.
Theodoros Kouvakis, how representative are the protesters? Do you have a sense the violence that we saw, and it really was horrific violence, 100 buildings burned and destroyed in Athens, that this is being masterminded by a small group, as was suggested in the report, or is this a spontaneous outbreak of popular frustration?
Frustration is there, but I have a suspicion that these arsons were masterminded by a small group of people who definitely are not representative of the broader public. I can't prove it, definitely, but I think that's the case. Because people are frustrated, because majority of people have had their income cut, they have had their pensions cut, they have to pay a lot more taxes and contributions in social security systems. They have they are living in poverty. Okay, but we have example of this kind of people staying on the main square of Athens for something like a month, protesting non-violently and making their case. So I think last Sunday's revolt was not genuine. I think it was ulterior motives behind it.
Ulrike Herrmann, it's often said that Greece is simply paralyzed by cronyism, by patronage. How do you break through such dysfunctional structures rather than, in a sense, reinforce them? It's sometimes now being said by critics that the politicians in Greece are only clinging more ardently to their privileges because they sense that the structure is crumbling.
Well, I think the only hope is that there evolve new parties and new politicians. For example, in Thessaloniki, the second biggest town, they have a mayor who's independent and who seems to be very good and trying to reform the city, at least. And I think that this can become an example for whole of Greece. And I think that most Greeks, in fact, look at Thessaloniki as a new model for how Greece could be. But I agree that this might take a year or two to happen, that the really new politicians and new parties evolve. And so probably the next government, and that will be a problem, is still dominated by the old parties and especially by the old politicians. For example, Samaras really is a very big problem because, you know, he is a nationalist. He was the one who tried to cash in on this whole issue with Macedonia. And so I think that as long as Samaras is having his say in Greece, the Europeans will be very, very doubtful about the reforms in Greece. It's also a personal issue in a way. So that is really a problem. And Samaras apparently really tries to obstruct Papademos, which is also a problem.
Moritz Döbler, Ulrike Herrmann mentioned lots of skepticism abroad regarding the Greek politicians' willingness to embrace true reform. That skepticism has been voiced in such a way that people in Greece have said some very angry things, particularly about your own country, about Germany. It has very much emerged as a villain in this piece in the eyes of Greeks. How do you see it?
I can see the point. I mean, but then again, if we're talking about the 130 billion euros that are supposed to be mobilized for Greece, Germany has taken the most part of that. So Germany is not so much adding to the pain, but helping with lots and lots of money. What I think, though, the German government didn't do and should have done is talk more about what kind of growth, how can you stir growth in Greece, and how can you create jobs? What are ways to more growth in Greece? We have not been talking about that in Europe a lot. We've talked about reforms and austerity and saving, cutting state spending. But what are the sectors that Greece can develop business models? And if you look back at the German history, the recent German history, only 9 years ago, Germany was dubbed the sick man of Europe. We had an unemployed, 5 million unemployed people. 9 years later, Germany is dubbed the leading nation in Europe, the wealthiest nation in Europe, that is a role model for France. Who would have thought that would ever happen? Now, we're talking about reforms in Greece that are supposed to last for 9 years. We're saying that in 2020 there should be 120% of GDP ratio. That span of 9 years is the span that we're talking about, not a span of 2 weeks or 2 days or a month. But I think we have to go in for the long haul, and I think we have to talk about what kind of growth, how can you create jobs in Greece? What sectors should be creating jobs? Is it all going to be tourism? Probably not. So what kind of industries do you need to attract?
Let us talk about that in just a moment, but I'd like to stick briefly with this question of the bitterness that's arisen between Greece and Germany. We heard one Greek leader this week saying that Germany had insulted his country. Theodoros Kouvakis, are you concerned that the social fabric of Europe is being ripped apart. We heard in the report that the social fabric of Greece is suffering. What about larger European tensions? Are they becoming almost a risk to the stability of Europe?
I don't think there was ever social cohesion in Europe. We are different people. We have, in good times, the will to work together. And as it seems, in hard times, we are breaking apart. Maybe that is what politicians had in mind when they were forming the European Union and the Euroland, the Eurozone. Maybe that's what they had in mind, but it was more wishful thinking than pragmatism. I mean, you can't only think of good times, you always also have to foresee about bad times. And now that bad times have come, you see that we are, yes, we're neighbours, we respect each other, more or less. We like each other, more or less. We buy from each other, we sell to each other, but the so-called cohesion doesn't exist. I don't know if I'm wrong, but I think I'm not.
I don't think it needs to exist either. I think it's a quite good idea to have different living standards in Europe. I'm not sure if it would be a wise idea to put all Europeans on the same level of living standards. It doesn't make sense.
It's not feasible.
Social cohesion, of course, also means a sense of shared values. And Ulrike Herrmann, what we heard Moritz Stübler suggesting is that Germans are being expected to foot a potentially rather large bill for the Greeks, and many question whether the Greeks live by the same values. On the other hand, is Germany perhaps imposing a kind of a Calvinist austerity ideology on the rest of Europe?
Yeah, it does, and that's the problem, because, of course, if everyone just saves and saves and saves, then, of course, you'll have a recession. And what you can see in all numbers is now that the whole of the Eurozone is heading towards a recession, while the rest of the EU, those countries who do not belong to the Euro, they have growth. So apparently something is going really wrong in the Eurozone, and that's this austerity program. And, and another thing, of course, is true. We could afford to pay for Greece. I mean, Greece is a big problem, but nonetheless, it's a very small country with just 10 million inhabitants and a GDP that's as big as Hesha. Now, no one would expect the Eurozone to collapse because of Hesha. So,
one of the German states, for those who are not in the know.
Yeah, one of the German states. Yeah, so, one has to be careful not to exaggerate the Greek problem.
The latest figures, let's just take a quick look at that. The latest figures on Greek growth, or lack of it, are truly horrifying.
Yes,
We've seen the Greek economy shrinking by almost 7%. Moritz Stübler asked a moment ago, what could possibly turn that around? Here's a closer look.
The mainstay of the Greek economy is tourism. It accounts for 18% of the country's national product. But more could be done if the infrastructure were improved. With better airports, for example, it might be possible to attract more visitors from China or the United States. There is similar potential in the shipping industry. With better ports, Greece could make more of its geographical position. The agriculture sector could also be more productive. Greek olive oil is reputed to be the best in Europe. Yet much of it is sold well below its potential value. And in less traditional areas too, there is much potential. Greek firms have already shown promise in solar energy and other high-tech industries. There's a well-educated young workforce. The Greek economy needs to grow at a fast pace if Athens is to pay down its remaining debts. But at the moment, it's shrinking.
Theodoros Kouvakis, isn't the best way, maybe the only way, to get that economy growing again, a currency devaluation, in other words, exit from the euro?
Well, it could be one of the ways to deal with the problem. It would have very serious repercussions, and if you have a 25% poverty rate, you would probably reach something like 70% poverty rate, which is too much. I mean, it reminds me of collective guilt, okay? Which is not a good thing to do in Europe in 2011. 12. I don't know. Greece has a potential, yes, definitely, tourism. But we don't have infrastructure, despite the 100 billion euros that were given by cohesion funds and structural funds and all that.
There is a lot of infrastructure, to be honest. You build roads everywhere. But
no,
you know,
we didn't build roads everywhere. We built roads only in Athens and one road connecting Greek border with Turkey to
I
Italy,
think there are lots of roads in Greece, but the problem is roads alone don't help. You also need some companies that produce something to be shipped on these roads, and that's what's missing, not the roads. And that points to another problem. I mean, for example, the film mentioned that you could invest into agriculture. Now, that's exactly what the European Union did with billions. But those billions that went to agriculture for the last 20 years just didn't amount to anything. Instead, now Greece, a highly productive country by nature, imports its agricultural goods. And so everything went wrong. That's really a problem. And I think that's why now it's so hard to see a solution, because the help that was there didn't help at all.
But you were asking about whether it would make sense for Greece to leave the euro. I think you can look at it from different sides. If I look at it from the German perspective or the European perspective, I would say, no, it doesn't make sense, because it's going to be just as expensive.
Yeah,
because we would of course need to rescue Greece anyways. Now, if you look at it from the Greek perspective, it doesn't make any sense either. If you're talking about the industries that you want to attract to Greece, what kind of investor is going to invest in Greece if it's politically dysfunctional, has a currency that's not worth anything, and has no stability? Who's going to go there and build solar power plants? Nobody.
So you're saying there's no exit option?
The option is there, but it's not logical. It doesn't make sense.
Right. It needs to be on the table so people get the point. But I don't think it doesn't help anybody.
Let me put a point here. Greece was producing something like 70% of foodstuff it was consuming back in late 1980s to the mid-1990s. Now it produces less than 35%. That happened during Greece being part of the Eurozone, because it changed the whole system of finance and economy. I mean, easy money, low interest rates, so it makes workforce being more expensive, so you can't have agricultural products which are competitive.
Yeah.
Okay?
But it's a global economy. I mean, the same is true for the textile industry. When you look around what we four are wearing, most of the stuff that we're wearing is produced in China or Vietnam or in Asia. Yeah. It used to be that Greece had a sizable proportion of clothing that you wore in Europe. It doesn't anymore, but it's not going to come back. I mean, that's history. What you need to talk about is what are the future industries that you want to attract. Correct. And for instance, we in Germany fund solar power even though we don't have any sun. So why don't we stop the funding here and start the funding there? Why are we talking about desert tech in North Africa, where we have a country that has lots of sun and lots of space? You know, that kind of things need to be talked about, I think.
Ulrike Herrmann, we've heard Moritz Döbler say the exit option is not really, doesn't offer any positive benefits for either side. How do you see it? Do you think in the end Greece simply can't be permitted to leave the Eurozone?
Well, what's true is that the exit would be as expensive as if Greece stayed within the euro. The only advantage would be that the wage costs, which Mr. Kouvaras mentioned, would go down immediately. And that is the main problem why Greece at the moment can't compete, because thanks to the easy money, the wages mounted much too high. I mean, for example, the prices in Athens are much higher than they are here in Berlin. In Athens, you pay €5 for a cappuccino. Here you pay €2. And that somehow illustrates what problem Greece has. All its prices, for no matter what, are too high. Now, if you compete within one currency, you have to have prices that are competitive. Now, basically, the wages in Greece must go down by at least 30%, or the prices must go down.
They have already done.
No, they haven't, because, the International Monetary Fund just says that they've gone down by 3% on the whole, because not everyone has a wage cut. The wages are no longer increasing, and of course people have to pay more taxes, but it's not true that the wages go down very quickly. Now that is a problem for the competitiveness. And but if you left the euro, you would be able to compete. The only problem is that only 20% of the Greek economy at the moment is export-orientated. So even if they had left the euro, there would be nothing to sell. So I agree, basically, with Mr. Döbler that it would be better for the Greek to stay within the euro.
Theodoros Kouvakis, one of the Greek politicians, said this week that if the country were to leave the euro, the social misery would be simply unbearable for the majority of Greek citizens. Do you think that's correct? And there's going to be social misery any way Greece heads at this point. Is the country stable enough to handle this level of pain?
Let me correct you. It is not going to be. It is already there. Okay, because there is maybe not even one family without one new unemployed now. There is not one family without a drastic cut in family income. Prices are still high. I mean, prices in the supermarkets for exactly the same products that you buy here for €1.50, you buy them in Greece for €3. Same brand, same. Okay?
I'm afraid I have to end it there. Thank you very much for being with us today. Thanks to all of you out there for tuning in.